Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillos was born in Genova, Quindio on January 25, 1957 to Manuel Antonio Garavito and Rosa Delia Cubillos. The eldest of 7 siblings, he had 3 brothers and 3 sisters. His father Manuel Antonio was described by Garavito as being a womanizer, a drunkard, and extremely physically and emotionally abusive to Garavito throughout his childhood. He further went on to describe his mother Rosa Delia as a violent woman, and someone who showed him little affection and care as a child. On account of the ongoing armed conflict in Colombia at the time, the family was forced to relocate to Ceilán, Valle del Cauca before Garavito entered primary school. Due to the instability of his parents' marriage, Garavito's home life was plagued by years of incessant fighting, domestic violence, and extreme neglect. When Garavito was 6 or 7, he recalled being strapped to a tree and beaten by Manuel with a tree branch as he attempted to defend his mother, who Manuel was known to beat even in pregnancy. Sleeping in the same bed with his father, Garavito vaguely recalled being fondled once by him. Evidently, the beatings Manuel inflicted were so spontaneous and severe that they prompted Garavito and his siblings to hide whenever he returned home from work. When Garavito was around 11 years old, his father forbade him to finish the 5th grade in favor of making money to sustain the family. This crushed the young boy, who was also forbidden to have friends or a girlfriend by his father Manuel. He would then be subject to brutal sexual abuse by a local drugstore owner and neighbor on his father's visits to see the neighbor, lasting from age 12 to 14. The man was a friend of Manuel's, and had burned Garavito with a candle, bitten him violently and cut him with a razor blade during the molestations. The physical trauma proved so severe that Garavito would not be able to properly ejaculate, and would sustain an erectile dysfunction problem that would follow him into adulthood. Fearing that his father would not believe him, and perceiving no one would care anyway, Garavito chose to keep his sexual abuse experiences to himself. When Garavito was first abused, his psychological trauma led him to kill and dissect 2 birds, which prompted him to feel remorse and shame shortly thereafter. After stoning the birds, Garavito would begin to suggest to his younger brothers and sisters, who shared a bed with Garavito, that they sleep with him naked. He would subsequently begin to sexually fondle his younger siblings, which was evidently overlooked by parents Manuel and Rosa as they slept, often stripping them naked, insisting as an adult that they may not even remember the incidents. Garavito would also claim to have began abusing a 6-year-old boy. According to those who knew him, Garavito would become very withdrawn and extremely aggressive, and ready to take revenge on the world. At the age of 14, Garavito would then be raped again by another neighbor, who beat him into the undergrowth, and showed him heterosexual pornography that apparently disgusted him. Blaming it on the sexual abuse he endured as a youth, Garavito would recall feeling shame at not being able to feel aroused enough by the experience. Garavito would later attempt to initiate sexual relations with women as a 15-year-old youth, but his advances toward them were consistently rejected, frustrating Garavito. As a young man in his late teens, Garavito started working as an assistant at a compensation fund and later in a chain of stores, and studying in marketing. Despite his newfound career, he began to have problems with his co-workers, clients, and bosses. Sometimes the conflicts were so extreme that they resulted in physical altercations. After losing his job, he worked as a street vendor who sold religious icons and a migrant worker, developing various relationships with women over the course of his adulthood that were mostly platonic in nature. Working on a coffee plantation as a teenage youth in the early 1970s in Trujillo, he first fell in love with an older woman, a schoolteacher and single mother who he would live with on a sporadic basis throughout his adulthood, named Luz Mary Ocampo Orozco, who he attended church with. Garavito claimed to have had a child with her in a 2006 interview, despite admitting in the past to never having had intercourse with her. Consequently, authorities have not been able to corroborate this claim. Many of the women he befriended had children, who Garavito was known to have treated as if they were his own children, in addition to being a loving boyfriend when sober. Garavito was also known by his friends to be amicable in spite of his violent temper and occasional drunken states, in which he had evidently swore to murder his father. Garavito gradually fell into alcoholism to cope with his traumatic childhood, and began to participate in Alcoholics Anonymous meetings in 1978. Garavito also converted to the Pentecostal faith and began working as a store clerk, where he had coincidentally reconnected briefly with his first girlfriend Luz Mary. Drifting from his family, he was only close to his sister Esther, who avoided him due to his alcoholism. Relocating to the town of Armenia, Garavito acquired a day job at a bakery before being fired as a result of provoking a fight with his co-workers. He subsequently attempted suicide and was held under psychiatric care in 1979, where he expressed a desire to die and was primarily treated for his diagnosed depression and given medication for psychosis. Fearful of consequences, Garavito chose not to inform the psychiatrist of his pederast inclinations or his sexual impotence with women. Following his attendance of local church services in which he would remorsefully beat his chest during prayer, Garavito would subsequently attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and occasionally visit psychiatrists before ending his day by frequenting Valencia Park, a known hotspot for child prostitution. A prolific pederast and torturer of youths, Garavito began to feel apathy with his crimes. On October 4, 1992, he had spotted 13-year-old boy Juan Carlos walking near a bazaar he had been drinking at. According to Garavito, the reflection of the moonlight had invoked a strange force within him, reminding him of his childhood, which compelled him to murder upon entering a state of rage. He began to follow the child, buying synthetic rope and a butcher knife on the way before offering him work for 500 or 1,000 pesos. The boy left the crowded area in Jamandi with Garavito to a remote area near the local railroad, where he was later found with his front teeth knocked out, severe cuts to his rectum and throat, and his genitals severed. 6 days later, Garavito would make the trip to Trujillo to see his sister Esther and murder 12-year-old Johan Alexander Pinaranda on the way in Tolua as he attempted to control his urges by drinking brandy. Soon after the first murder, Garavito would begin to compulsively murder youth, predominantly male, and poverty-stricken. Garavito's victims were clearly identified by their age, sex, and social status. He targeted children, mostly boys between the ages of 6 to 13, with the single exception of a crippled 16-year-old boy, who were either homeless, peasants, or orphaned. Claiming to feel a force within that compelled him to kill, Garavito would look for children and lure them away by bribing them with small gifts such as money, candy, or odd jobs. Terrified of the dark, he would approach them in broad daylight in public places ranging from the rural countryside to the crowded city streets. He would also wait and drink brandy near school zones on evenings to wait for unknowing children. Once he had the trust of a child, Garavito would walk to a secluded spot or mass grave site with the victim, encouraging them to talk about their personal life until they were tired and vulnerable, which then made them easy to handle. After sipping about half a bottle of brandy, Garavito would proceed to bind the child, intimidating them with a knife as he fondled and sometimes masturbated over them. According to Garavito, he made a pact with the devil, and satanic ritual was also incorporated into the murders of the children, who were apparent blood sacrifices. Usually, the child would endure prolonged rape and torture by having the hands, feet, and buttocks stabbed with a screwdriver. Garavito was also known to place broken blades in between his fingers, and flay the skin of the child's buttocks. Teeth were often knocked out and sharpened objects inserted into the anus. The penis and testicles were also often severed and placed into the child's mouth while alive. They were burned with a lighter, stomped on, and often showed deep cuts in the back, belly, and throat. In some cases, they were sexually abused as their intestines poured out of their belly, impaled through the anus and out of the mouth, and stabbed over 100 times. Garavito's climax would occur when he had decapitated the child alive or cut the throat as he finished before leaving the severed genitals in the mouth of the decapitated head. 1533 Necrophilia with the victim's corpse was also sometimes involved in the crimes, sometimes prematurely, as Garavito could only achieve orgasm by beating and stabbing his victims during intercourse. The bodies of the children were all found completely naked, and all bore bite marks and signs of anal penetration. Containers of lubricant were found near the bodies, along with empty bottles of the cheapest brandy in Colombia. Most corpses showed signs of prolonged torture. Investigation. Beginning in October 1992, boys between the ages of 6 through 13 began disappearing rapidly from the streets of Colombia. Due to the decades-long civil war, many children in Colombia were poor, homeless, or orphaned. For years, these murders had gone unnoticed because many of the victims had no police report filed on their disappearance. Clusters of bodies had begun popping up all over Colombia, yet authorities did not take much notice until 1997, when mass graves of as many as 41 children were uncovered in Pereira. This large number of missing children called for a widespread investigation, as these killings were not confined to a specific area. The brutality was so fierce to authorities that they initially hypothesized the killings were performed by a satanic cult or an international child trafficking ring. On February 6, 1999, outside the town of Palmira, the bodies of 2 naked children were found lying next to each other on a hill near a sugarcane field. The next day, only meters away, they had discovered another child's body. All 3 bodies had their hands bound and bore signs of sexual abuse. The victims' necks were severely cut and bruises were on their backs, genitals, legs and buttocks. The murder weapon was found in the same area as the bodies. Garavito had passed out partially naked on top of a child's corpse while drunk with a cigarette in his left hand, causing the cane field to catch fire. He burned himself severely in the process and left behind his burnt glasses, shoes, money, and underwear. Receipts and a note containing a woman's, Garavito's girlfriend, address was also found. From his glasses, the authorities were able to determine that the local serial killer was middle-aged and had an astigmatism in his left eye. His shoes also showed that he walked with a limp and stood between 163 and 167 centimeters tall. They falsely arrested a local sex offender named Pedro Pablo Ramirez Garcia, who was 44 and had a limp in his right foot. As 2 boys disappeared in Pereira, a young boy had outed Garcia as the man who attempted to assault him. He was kept in jail until more children began to disappear in Bogotá. Meanwhile, Aldemar Duran, the main detective, had begun to suspect Garavito as their wanted killer. Garcia was released after Duran was able to track down the girlfriend and sister of Garavito. Garavito's girlfriend was contacted, but told police that she had not seen him in months. She did, however, give to the police a black cloth suitcase that Garavito had left in her possession, which contained a number of his belongings. These items included pictures of young boys, detailed journals of his murders, tally marks of his victims and bills. This new information led them to Garavito's residence, but the property was vacant. Detectives believed that Garavito was either traveling for work or away attempting to find his next victim. He was picked up by the local police just a few days later on an unrelated charge of attempted rape against a 12-year-old boy. A homeless 16-year-old had been close enough to hear the struggle between Garavito and the child and began to curse and throw stones at Garavito. Garavito then made his way through the undergrowth to stab the teenager with a dagger. The boy and the teenager both fled to the Rosa Blanca farmhouse located on La Coralina Road in Villa Vicencio, where Garavito tracked them down before fleeing. A search was conducted after they phoned police there, and authorities found Garavito walking out of the woods as they urged angry locals not to get involved in the search. He gave them a false ID and claimed to be Bonifacio Morera Liscano, a local politician. Despite this, they suspected the man to be Garavito anyway. Garavito was also said to have operated in Ecuador during the summer of 1998, when he murdered 14-year-old Abel Gustavo Lourvales on July 20, 1998 and 12-year-old Jimmy Leonardo Palacios Ancundaya in Chon, Ecuador. Marked for his thick Colombian accent, he was spotted at an all-girls school near Santo Domingo, Ecuador before fleeing Ecuadorian authorities who had been setting up an operation to catch him. There they found two corpses, one of whom was a young girl who had been raped, tortured, and murdered in similar fashion to that of Garavito's modus operandi. 44 Marked for his thick Colombian accent, locals spotted a foreign drifter begging for money in July and August of that year. In his confession, Garavito also stated that he had allegedly committed murder in Venezuela. Arrest, confession, and sentencing. Garavito was arrested on April 22, 1999 on separate charges of attempted rape. 10 He was questioned about the local killings and his attempted rape charges. Police speculated that Garavito had planned on killing the young boy if the bystander had not intervened. After several months of interrogation, detectives suspected Garavito of being La Bestia, although he had insisted on his innocence. The detailed description of his killings brought Garavito to tears. For Colombia's Justice Department, Garavito's confession was not enough. Garavito had an eye condition that was rare and only found in men in a particular age group. His glasses were specifically designed for his unique condition. These particular glasses were found at a crime scene. Garavito also left behind bottles of brandy, his underwear, and his shoes. DNA was found on the victims, along with the other items left behind. Police scheduled the entire jail where Garavito was being detained to get an eye exam, the outcome of which would help police pair the glasses to Garavito. By making it mandatory for all the prisoners, it reduced Garavito's suspicion and kept him from lying about his eyesight. His height of 165 centimeters and limp was also crucial in connecting him to the investigators' findings. While Garavito was out of his cell, detectives took DNA samples from his pillow and living area. The DNA found on the victims was a match to the DNA found in Garavito's cell. Garavito confessed to murdering about 140 children and was charged with killing 172 altogether throughout Colombia. 45 He was found guilty on 138 of the 172 accounts, the others are ongoing. Garavito was sentenced to 1,853 years and 9 days in prison, the lengthiest sentence in Colombian history. However, Colombian law limits imprisonment to 40 years, and, because Garavito helped police find the victims' bodies, his sentence was further reduced to 22 years. Garavito is currently serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in Valledupar in the department of El Cesar in Colombia. He is held separately from all other prisoners because it is feared that he would be killed immediately. He will become eligible for parole in 2023 when he has served 3/4 of his sentence. Today, Garavito remains hopeful, having expressed to Colombian Senator Carlos Moreno de Caro apparent plans to enter Colombian Congress, enter the ministry as a Pentecostal pastor, and marry a woman, in rejection of his self-admitted homosexuality, in the hopes that he will be able to help abused children upon his release. As of the present, Garavito suffers from severe eye cancer which leaves him weak and fatigued, requiring daily blood transfusions. He spends most of his time making handcuffs, earrings, and necklaces in the medical unit of Valledarpar's prison. Many Colombians criticized the possibility of Garavito's early release. In recent years, Colombians have increasingly felt that Garavito's sentence was not sufficient punishment for his crimes. Some have argued he deserves either life in prison or the death penalty, neither of which exist in Colombia. Colombian law had no provision or method to impose a sentence longer than what Garavito received, which was seen as a deficiency in the law caused by the failure to address the possibility of a serial killer in Colombian society. The law has since increased the maximum penalty for such crimes to 60 years in prison. That's the end of the story of Colombia's Luiz Garavito, one of the most notorious criminals in the world in our previous video. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. You are always updated on other interesting news stories. Thanks.